Welcome to the Fabulous Fifties and Beyond. I'm Jim Pollard, co-host with my wife Janetta, and today we're going to have a very interesting story. One of the things we want to talk about is Thanksgiving, because this will be the show prior to Thanksgiving, but we want to talk about things that happen in our lives that we never expect and the outcomes that we never expect. Our guests today are Joel and Geneva Ellington. You stay tuned and we'll be right back.
And he'd say, go with what you got. Start from where you are. Give it your best shot. Keep reaching for that star. Get in the race. Keep your own pace. Keep moving and never stop. Just go. Go with what you got.
Welcome back. I'm Jim Pollard, and our co-host today is my wife, Janetta. How many times have you ever just thought about your future and what might happen and what might not happen? And I think as we get older, we begin to think about it more and more than we have in the past. And this is going to be an exciting show. Our good friends, Joel and Geneva Ellington, are here and going to talk about something that happened 2 years ago.
Right.
18 months ago, right after the ice storm. You know, the ice storm created a lot of messes around this area. There was a lot of work, cleanup, things like that. And Joel was out cleaning up his mother's property, and a pretty horrible, I guess is a good word to use, thing happened there, because he was cutting a tree and it fell on him. And I'm going to since you don't remember anything after that point, I'm going to let Geneva Ann talk a little bit about what happened during that process. So Geneva, tell us.
Well, he had gone to his mother's with his two brothers, Jim and Gerald, to clean up around her place after the ice storm. And the three of them had eaten lunch there, and she had her sister, Helen Payton, there to help her because she's 93. She would have been 93 then. And they had a big lunch. And then Joel and his brothers went out to do things, clean up the yard. The brothers had gone to the back of the farm to drag off limbs and whatever. Our son, who lives next door to his mother, came up, and he and Joel were going to cut down just a small-sized tree right by the house, right by her back sliding glass doors. And that's when the trouble began. And would you like me to continue with what happened?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I wasn't there.
I understand.
I was at home, and I was washing the car. It was a warm day, and I was washing the car. And I get a call from our son, Shannon. He said, Mom, I think you better come over to grandmother's. Daddy's been hurt. He said, in fact, I know you better come over here to grandmother's. So there I was with wet clothes, and I thought hospital, you know. So I ran in and put on decent clothes and called my daughter, who is a nurse, lives next door, and I said, you know, I'm going to come pick you up. We've got to go to grandmother's. So that was where I was coming from. When I got there, the fire truck was blocking, well, more or less blocking her driveway there at Hard Money. There was the ambulance already there, and a lot of men, I'd say 10 men. And I looked, and Joel was lying on the ground. He was still lying there. And I could see that he was alive. He was moving or something to that effect. About that time, his two brothers walked up. Well, they did not know what had happened. They had been to the back of the farm with the other limbs, and I heard Gerald say, well, what happened? And then we pieced together the fact that he and Shannon were cutting the tree. Joel had the chainsaw. Shannon was in a truck with the rope tied off to the truck, right? And somehow at that point, nobody is really sure what happened. Some people think that Shannon may have, moved the rope and caused the tree to go in a different direction, what was intended. But we don't really know because Joel doesn't remember. The brothers weren't there. And Shannon was in the truck. But they're assuming that the tree knocked him down. But when I saw him, the tree was not on him or anything. Do you know what happened to the tree?
Well, they cut the tree up.
Yeah, I know
In a rough manner later.
Gerald burned that tree. But they said, you know, Gerald said, well, what happened? And different ones of the men that had come with the ambulance began to say, you know, well, that he's been hit with the tree. And shall I go on from there?
Well,
What happened next?
let me just say that you never know what happens. I mean, there can be 10 people standing there watching it and you get 10 different stories.
Sure.
That's the thing about it. I mean, and as you were saying earlier, you cut a lot of trees and you know.
The tree was between 20 and 24 inches in diameter, and that was the same tree that, as a kid, I set those trees out with my mother when we first moved there. And so I didn't know what happened. I don't even remember starting the saw. I asked Shannon if he could tell me, and he says, Dad, I look back, you were in a fetal position, the saw was still running, blood was coming from your nose, your mouth, and each ear. And then Gerald told me that it left quite a lot of blood, and he took a hose and washed it out before Mom could see it. Mom was 93 at the time. This was April the 27th, 09, when the accident happened. And they tell me that I flew in a helicopter and all that kind of good stuff. I don't remember any of it. They also said I was a bad guy in the hospital, and I think they must have been looking at it.
One thing I wanted to say, the ice storm was actually over. Y'all had been in Florida.
Right.
And the ice storm was actually over before y'all returned to Kentucky,
Right.
thinking everything would be all right. And then,
We were cleaning up.
yes.
Well, and that's it. You just never know. Number one, you don't never know sometimes what happens, and then you never know why it happens. But I think that as we move on, we can probably see the hand of God in all of it, and that's what's important. And we just don't know how God works. You know, we just don't know and understand. But we
His
do know
ways are not our ways.
His ways are not our
That's
ways.
right.
You know, but that he does work. And so go ahead, Geneva. And,
Well,
I'm going to add a little
Okay.
thing to it. See, we flew in the plane, evidently, and they come about 2.5 hours later to the hospital there in Evansville. And so I think it's interesting what the doctors told her, because they'd been working on me for some 2.5 hours before they arrived. You take it from
Well,
there if
let's
you will.
back up to the backyard. The first responder, one of the men who was in the ambulance, was Joel's second cousin, Matt Pierce. And he came up to me and he said, where do you want to take him to the hospital? And I said, I think I said Lourdes. And he said, well, Lourdes doesn't have an orthopedic surgeon on duty. And I said, well, okay, take him to Baptist. Well, then he comes back to me. He went to the ambulance, he came back, and he said, we're going to fly him out of here. And see, this was all out of my hands. And
in God's
so
hands.
he said, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to Vanderbilt, Evansville, or Memphis? Well, I was familiar with Vanderbilt, and I said, well, let's go to Vanderbilt. So he goes back to the ambulance, and he was talking to the pilot at that time, and I didn't know it. And he came back and he said, well, the pilot has picked Evansville, Deaconess, because he feels like that they have a wonderful head trauma unit. I said, fine, you know. So luckily, they just went from Mrs. Ellington's house 1 mile up the road to Hard Money Baptist Church. By that time, you know how kids are with texting, and all of my kids began to arrive from everywhere. Grandchildren, spouses, and we went to Hard Money Baptist Church parking lot. And that's where the helicopter picked him up. And Brother Ferris Sahani was there at home. And he come running out to us, and as Joel was being loaded onto the helicopter, Of course, I thought I could go with him, but
No.
no one could go. No one could. But I knew he was alive because he kept fighting this collar. And, you know, I knew he was very much alive. And so Brother Ferris said, well, let's have a circle of prayer. So as that helicopter was taking off to go to Evansville, then all of my children, grandchildren, their spouses, the children's spouses, we held hands with Brother Ferris there on the parking lot, and he prayed a sweet, beautiful prayer for Joel. That was the first known prayer other than what was going on in my heart. And so, you know, that was just very impressive to me to see all my children holding hands and praying for their dad.
And let me say, with all your children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren,
That was
that's a big circle.
That's a big circle.
You would probably circle the helicopter
That's
with
right.
no problem.
That's right. And so after that, you know, we said, okay, you know, how are we going to go? We spent about 30 minutes, I guess, getting all our things together because we knew it wouldn't be go up and come right back.
Right.
And there were, I believe, 3 carloads of us that went. And Shane said, Mom, Brother Ferris is going. And I turned to Brother Ferris and I said, don't you go. I mean, his wife was right there at the parsonage garage door and his children. I said, don't come with us, we'll be fine. But later on, Shane called me and said, Mom, he's in the car with me. So I thought that was really sweet of him to just take off. He just took off and went with us.
Well, this is a good place to transition and stop for right now because we're going to take a break and then we'll come back in a few minutes and we'll continue because we know what the final outcome is.
Right.
You know, he's sitting here.
That's right.
But there's a lot of in between. You know, it's like the story of the dash. You've heard the story of the dash, or have you?
On the tombstone?
On the tombstone. It's what's in between the 2 years, the beginning and the end.
That's right.
That really counts. So we've started now. And you're here, so we got to go between. So you stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
We didn't have much to give then. So when they showed up firing them mean looks around the place and staring us down on prices, well, I was angry. Didn't seem to bother my father, though. He had me load another bushel of apples in their trunk. I learned later on that this family was in need.
The greatest gift we give, it's in our heart, what we believe, the way we live.
Caring for others. Pass it on.
Welcome back to the Fabulous Fifites and Beyond. I'm Jim Pollard, co-host with my wife Janetta. Our guests today are Joel and Geneva Ellington. We're talking about a life story, something that happened in their life, and it's something that we felt like you needed to hear because as we think about Thanksgiving and things to be thankful for, this is something to really be thankful for. So you listen as we continue in our story. We had stopped at the point where the helicopter had taken off. And was it your first helicopter ride?
As far as I know, I haven't had one yet.
I was going to say your first helicopter ride, and you can't even remember it, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, who wants to tell? I guess Geneva Ann's one that has to come up with what they told her as she got there. Your drive was what, like a 2-hour drive?
Mm-hmm. At least,
Yeah.
And we flew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I got there, I'll try to move on. It was pretty traumatic. When I got there, they took me by myself, a doctor did, into a room that later somebody had to find for me. But they said, well, your husband's not going to make it through the night. Says he had a blood clot on each side of his temple, and he's not going to make it through the night. And of course, you know that feeling of it being surreal. This is not me. And I said, where's my children? I wanted my children. So he went out and got my 4 children, and they came in there and he repeated that. And, you know, it was just like, no, that's not going to happen. So I'll move on quickly. Then we just all camped out there in the waiting room, and we prayed and we prayed. And the next morning when they called me in there, they said, well, those are not blood clots, they are bruises. And so we were hoped up about that. But we were like on a roller coaster ride, because his teeth were all messed up and his jaw was broken. And the next thing they had to do was wire those teeth together. Well, that was very bad, because then when he woke up, it's hard to say when he was coming and going from the medication, but he was felt very restrained, and of course he had...
Well, for Joel not to be able to
Right.
talk, that's really something.
Absolutely.
So, I'll try to be quick. He had the teeth were wired, so he had to have a stomach tube down his throat. He had to be on a ventilator because he was having trouble breathing. They found he had an air bubble or something. They had to make a hole in his side to drain that so that he could breathe easier. Of course, he had to be on oxygen. And just one thing led to another. So after he had the surgery for his teeth, then is when the blood clot showed up in the lungs. And all this time at night, we would have to go to I'll have to tell that. We would go wherever we could go to sleep. And eventually they gave us a suite upstairs in the hospital. It was wonderful. They came one day and said, because we weren't leaving. Nobody was leaving, we had all this big crowd. And so they gave us a suite upstairs with bedroom, bath, all those facilities, and that made it easier. But the night that he got the blood clot in his lungs, they came to me again and said, your husband won't make it through the night because of the blood clot in his lungs. So they had a big prayer meeting that night. My daughter-in-law, Lee Alice, she got in touch with somebody at Trace Creek Church, and my daughter-in-law's mother came running down the aisle, said, Brother Ronnie, Joel is at the point of death, and they just had a big prayer meeting right there on Wednesday night.
I was there that night.
Were you there?
I was there.
Well, I thank you for your prayers. And he made it. The next day he had made it through the night. And the next thing that happened was that they wanted to put a filter in to keep out any more blood clots. Well, I talked to the doctors, because he had, I don't know how many. They said, well, he really has to.
Tell them about the atrial film.
Well, that's what I'm going to be next. So they put the filter in, and that night or the next night, whenever, well, a blood clot had already passed the filter, and so his heart went into this atrial fib. And you can probably tell that. You've heard it so many times.
Well, I didn't know that I was having any problems, but they said that it got up to 258 per minute, and that I didn't have a chance of making it. Now, this is what I've learned
that was the third time
later.
they said he wouldn't make it.
And but prayer and the good Lord took care of it. And so I ended up getting out and sent to Lourdes for rehabilitation, and I spent, I believe, 11 days at Lourdes. Didn't have any pain because they kept me so drugged up, I suppose, till I got home. And then the teeth and the wire, that stayed in for 2 or 3 weeks after I was home, and that was some of the problems. And I'm doing pretty good right now. I have, when I speak, I get echoes. When I listen to people talk or sing, everything's natural. But when I'm talking now, I'm getting echoes through the ears. But I still have good hearing. I put out a crop last year, and I've got a crop out this year. So we're at it, working at it, and we appreciate everything that all the churches, I've had people from all over the country. We found that groups out of 9 states had prayer for me.
Our church had a special Saturday morning prayer meeting for him. And, you know, we appreciated that so much that they came up on a Saturday morning and had a prayer meeting for
I
us.
think it was 33 that spent the night one night, I understand, and they had as many as 38 up there, but 33 spent the night, and some of them never went home.
He
Well, yeah.
did, excuse me.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
He did some really funny things, and one of the things that he told the physical therapist, the little young cute girls that would come in and try to get him up to walk, he told them one day, he said, "You want me to walk?" He said, "I've already walked 3 miles this morning."
Oh, no, you never know. And while you were talking, I counted at least 3 miracles that took place.
That's right.
And it's amazing. I like what some of these athletes have told doctors before. When I remember, I don't know who it was, but he's a big old professional football player, and he got hurt, got his neck broke. The doctor came in and told him, says, "You'll never walk in." He said, "You don't have a right to tell me that." You know, and I think that's so true. In his medical knowledge, he may understand that what's going on won't change, but sometimes doctors forget about the power of prayer.
Right.
You know, and that they are not the ultimate control. And I love a doctor who will tell you that I'll do all that I can, but I don't have the final say so.
Right. That's
You know,
right.
and what's going on in your body.
I worried about people that came in because I thought I couldn't entertain like I should, you know, and that worried me a lot. But I've tried to thank everyone, but I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody in the various churches in the community, friends, relatives, neighbors, for everything that they did and all the prayers they've had for me, because I'm still going to be around a while.
Yep. Well, you know, and that's the good thing about it, you know, we never know.
It definitely was not your time to go.
And that's what we tell people. You know, I turned my tractor over last fall, and it threw me off. And people said, "Well, how bad did you get hurt?" I said, "I didn't. I'm sitting on the ground. My tractor's running 100 miles an hour, it seemed like, it running full speed, because when it turned over, the throttle went full, and that diesel engine just run as hard as it can run. And I'm sitting there on that ground, I look around, I look up and I say, well, thank you, Lord, I guess you weren't
Right.
ready for me yet."
Right.
You know, and that was it, you know, it was just, that was a miracle within itself, that I didn't get a scratch.
Right.
Not
It
one
was.
scratch
It's
when I
a
got
miracle.
thrown off that tractor.
And you want to give the Lord the glory.
That's right, that's right, that's right. So it is. And we thought that since this is going to be our kind of our Thanksgiving show, that this is a good show to talk about, because in our show we try to talk about what's happening in people's lives. Janetta will tell you, because she wrote it in one of her books, that for years I've talked about witnessing to people, and I've said people could care less until you educate them or you witness to them, could care less about an event that happened 2,000 years ago. They want to know what's God doing in your life today. And I have a friend of mine in Florida. He's a completed Jew. It's Lee, you know.
I know.
And one of Lee's favorite greetings is, "What's God doing for you today?" or "What's God doing in your life today?"
So,
You know, and that's so important. And I think so many times people fail to realize that especially those of us who are Christians and in those who aren't, God is doing things in our lives on a daily basis.
That's right.
Brother Rick Miller and his wife came to see me, I
Our
believe,
pastor.
twice, our pastor.
Yeah.
They tell me that, and I remember some of them coming in, and but I don't think I entertained very well.
Yeah. Well, I understand.
I don't think you were expected to entertain.
I didn't entertain too well after I had my shoulder surgery and the nerve block didn't work. But you know, and I'm sure that there are some fun experiences that happened while you were there that
Very much so.
that they'll remind you of from time to
Right.
time. But that's
He began to want to go home, and everybody that would come in, he would say, "How did you get here? Have you got a car?" "Well, Geneva Ann, we can go home with them." You know, I
understand.
told him I didn't have a car. And at several times, he got to wanting to go home so bad, and I called his brother Jim. You told me to call Jim, didn't you? See if he would come get
I
him.
gave Jim a hard time, they tell me.
So
Yeah, he told me you
Yeah.
did. I heard that.
So I called Jim and told him that Joel was just wanting to come home. He needed to talk to him, that he couldn't come home. And so I told Joel, well, you talk to Jim, and he told you he wouldn't come get you. And after he hung up, he laid there a while, and he said, well, that flopped.
Well, they were doing what was best for you, and
That's right.
now I'm sure you understand. But that don't mean you didn't want to go home. Oh, I know that feeling.
But I do well remember that Wednesday night, being at Trace Creek,
Right.
and Brother Ronnie doesn't, go after people,
Right.
Interrupting his service.
Yeah.
But he was, everybody, they
Well,
said
they
he wouldn't-
told me that Judy Scarborough just ran down and said, Brother Ronnie, we've got to pray for Joel. And that they did. They just went to
yes.
their knees.
Yes, people did.
And that was when the blood clot was in the lung.
And I think Jimmy was in that service too, wasn't he?
He probably was, because he
And
wasn't with us.
He did
wasn't.
not know that Joel was
That's
that
true.
bad
He didn't know he was that
right
bad.
at that time. And I think he left and went and got your pastor, and they went up there. I'm not sure. That's
Yes,
what I
that's
I
a lot
remember.
of people came that night. I think the word was, if you want to see Uncle Joel, you better go. You know, so the nieces began to show up, and the nephews, and but the Lord just blessed us. And one of my biggest blessings was at night when we couldn't be with him, and we were in that suite that the hospital provided for us. My children would sit around and they would search the scripture for verses, that could apply to him. Like they had one verse, I think it was in Psalms, I should remember, but it says, so-and-so will not die but will live. And we put Joel's name in there, We
right.
said, we claimed that promise, Joel will not die, but he will live. And that, being with my children and seeing them study their Bible and search for scripture
Yeah.
that
And their
were
faith.
promises,
Yeah,
right.
and their faith, right.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Well, we really appreciate y'all being here today. And for those of you out there in the audience, it's really important, and I see this over and over and over again to a lot of people, and every chance I get, I've written it in our blogs. And by the way, if you want to find out more about this, you can find out about it by going to thefabulousfifties.net. And on thefabulousfifties.net, of course, you can see all of our shows. You can also, we blog there 2 or 3 times a week. We have different series of stories going on now about happiness and retirement. So you can go there and you can find out different things. But I want you to think about, what do you have to be thankful for during this Thanksgiving season? You see, everybody out there knows that I'm Santa Claus. But the thing that I hate is that we have Halloween and we almost skip Thanksgiving.
That's true.
And to me, Thanksgiving is one of the most important times of the year.
Absolutely.
To thank God, look back and see what He's done during the year and what He's doing currently in our lives, because He is working and moving all the time. So we appreciate y'all being here. We appreciate you being there in our audience today. And remember, use it or lose it.
Can't see as well as I used to. Can't run as far or as fast. Sometimes I think that the old me is becoming exactly that. But when I start thinking of all I don't have, that's when I